giving a workshop on filtering text using TextSifter. How do you pronounce it?
TextSifter.
TextSifter. Stu's, I guess I think of him originally as a political scientist, but he's become an entrepreneur and inventor. I mean, he invented software for filtering text. And I met him and he became known to me because of his work with e-rulemaking. And back in 2003, was it 2003 or 4 we met?
I think 2003 at Oxford.
You know, we became the whole idea, we know most recently that, 22 million or more comments have been submitted to the FCC in terms of its internet freedom or net neutrality rulings.
That's the flood part.
And how many by bots? Let's see if we'll find out today.
Yeah, well, many, but how do we sift through 22 million text messages to figure out what are real comments and what's War and Peace and what's your latest homework, your child's homework, and various other things. So he really started. I was a pioneer in this issue, which they call e-rule. You called, or who? It'd be very interesting to find out who coined that term, e-rulemaking.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't me, although I started the e-rulemaking research group, and I organized the first sort of multi-agency e-rulemaking meeting at the Council of Excellence in Government before the E-Gov Act of 2002. So I was around when we were coming up with it, and I just don't think I coined it.
Well, I've asked him to talk about. He's been talking about TextSifter and this his Discover Text software, and he's the founder and CEO of this company. And but I've asked him to give us sort of the history, blow by blow, of e-rulemaking, because it's a fascinating area. It's very much related to policy making in terms of how you make sense of comments and either on Twitter or on other technologies using specific comments. So, Stu, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's actually been a great day.
We have so few people here, we might just go around because, like Adam, we can start with Adam and go around. He was at the FCC and is doing work on all sorts of text reading.
Yeah. So my name is Adam Candu. I'm a professor at the law school. I worked as a communication lawyer both in and before the FCC for about 8 years. And currently I'm working on a data set of, we downloaded all of ECFS.
Okay. All of it?
All of it. And
I'm surprised they had a capability to do that, to be quite honest.
We didn't, mostly legal ways. And
There you want.
you know, unfortunately, so my co-author is actually now in startup, and I'm still working, sort of flailing around with figuring out exactly what to do with all of this stuff. But so I'm very interested and familiar with your work and looking forward to it.
Thanks. Well, maybe we should put the data in Discover Text for a sample.
I thought about that. So.
I'm Rochelle, PhD student, second career, and working with Bill on cybersecurity capacity, and also how do we encourage people, communicate in a way that will help people improve their digital hygiene.
Along the way, I actually met the head of cyber threat detection at the DHS at a meeting.
Really?
About how they do what they do, and we gave them some ideas. And at a certain point, he said to me, we have to stop talking because we don't have security clearance, we can't go any further. But the most interesting thing in that meeting was we were two guys in a conference room like this, meeting room at DHS. He's the head for the whole country.
Yeah.
And somebody comes walking in about 30 minutes into our meeting and says, your meeting is being broadcast to all the other meeting rooms.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. Don't put that on the internet.
I actually did that with the privacy commissioner in the UK. We actually,
Yeah.
we didn't realize until break that we were the web.
That's
But it just shows you that you
Boxes
can
on, like,
your
column
assumption
13.
should be that everything is.
Everyone's
Oh,
watching all the time.
yeah. Because seriously, unless these are
Yeah.
bypassed,
Yeah.
their
Right.
microphones.
The most important thing I learned in that meeting though was that most cyber threat detection is based on reports of these stream of reports that come in, and it's how you process those reports that determines how quickly you can intervene when a threat is detected. So people are writing reports constantly about cyber threats. It's the report, which are just text documents flowing into DHS.
Wow. Yeah.
I think I can tell you that
We're
without being
So,
shot.
mistake to have introductions first.
We're already
Let's
behind
go
schedule.
short and
Yeah.
short and do
Phoebe Reisdorf, I'm an assistant professor here in the Quello Center and in the department, and the assistant director of the Quello Center.
Could you say more about that?
It's a lot.
Leah Fernandez and postdoctoral researcher.
And you're going to hear who I am. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm Anna Lee. I'm assistant professor in this department, media and
Very good.
So,
Thank you all for coming on what I gather is a busy day.
Yeah.
For an
Unusually busy.
eclectic talk. I must say that this is, you guys have really signed up for something unique here. So what I currently do, what I just spent the last 4 hours doing was trying to explain to some really bright people who asked amazing
Great.
questions. Every question was a good one. What I've learned over the last 17 years about training humans to label text and training machines based on human labeling, and all of this happened because of e-rulemaking. And I'll say more about that. But essentially, the area of work I'm in is creating training sets for machine learning, and trying to create the best possible training sets for machine learning, and incorporating what we've learned about humans, which is that they're kind of flawed creatures, and they're not very good. My own personal background is I was actually an organic farmer in Eugene. I dropped out of English PhD program to grow garlic, among other things, which I've been growing now for 22 or 23 years. Many people introduce me, I'm kind of disappointed as the garlic guy, because I have a garlic channel on YouTube.
Michigan, we've one of the best garlic in the country.
Yeah.
I haven't tried mine yet. And as a first-year graduate student in political science, I organized the first ever Politics of Sustainable Agriculture conference in the history of sustainable agriculture, which I thought was pretty cool. We raised a lot of money, and it was a great conference. And my background as a political scientist is pretty shaky, because I was really a historian, right? And I was interested in journalism theory and agenda setting, and it was agenda setting in the title of my dissertation, and all my data was crumbling newspapers. And we did it all with, I did it all with pen and paper. It was a 500-page treatise of the Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916, and that was my data. So you might be sitting there wondering, like, what does this historian have to do with e-rulemaking? Well, coming out of grad school, I didn't have what would be described as a very competitive profile in the political science market. I wasn't a game theorist. I wasn't doing rational choice theory. I didn't like doing quantitative work. I was a qualitative researcher, and I needed a new topic. And so in the fall of 1999, when I was at Providence College, just by chance, early days of roaming around the internet, I discovered that there had been 250,000 public comments submitted on what the label organic would mean nationally. Now we have a national organic standard, but this grew out of a rulemaking that resulted from a piece of legislation, and they were innovators at the NOP, which is what they went by, because they put the thing online. There was no Regulations.gov, there was very little online rulemaking. They put their proposed rule online, and they got 250,000 public comments. And I wrote to them and said, hey, can you send me some of the data? And they sent me a zip disk with 20,000 comments that were in a format that was easy, right? Because they received it in different formats, and that was part of the problem. The groups broke the fax machines. There was all sorts of crazy stuff. And back then, that was a strategy, right? Break the fax machines, get above the fold of the Washington Post for breaking the fax machines, literally. So I got this data. I got an NSF grant. In fact, it was the first. This was the final event of the first 30,000 of what was close to $4 million of NSF research funding for our group. And essentially, we went to Washington. We held a workshop. 5 agencies showed up at the Council for Excellence in Government, EPA, DOT, big ones, Social Security Administration, and they sent teams of people to, as a junior faculty member on his first grant, this was like all mind-blowing stuff for me, that all these people came to this fancy room in Washington, D.C., and would talk to me and David and Steve, and I had a group of students. We actually brought 10 students with us for a summer study seminar in D.C. 2 summers in a row. And so that was the start of all the grant writing, and this was right before the eGov Act of 2002. We had Lieberman's staffers there. It was Lieberman's bill that became the eGovernment Act of 2002. So right there, we were basically turning the internet for e-rulemaking. At the time, I was a student of a guy named John Dryzek, who some of you may know, deliberative democratic theorist, probably the most important one beyond Jürgen Habermas himself, right? He was Habermasian. And we were looking for, and what I did when I made this deck is I went back into my old files and found my old PowerPoints. So there's different sort of PowerPoint styles and things like that. I pulled a slide out from every year to explain the trajectory. But we were pretty naive back then. I mean, we were optimistic, to say the least, that any of these Habermasian things were going to be happening. But we believed the internet would at least make it possible.
Charming slide.
Thank you. It's kind of quaint, isn't it? And of course, this is not what happened. And when we tried to operationalize students using software to look at comments to find these things, what we found is we couldn't find a single comment that reflected any of these things. And we had tons of them. We had, wet comments on wetlands, the Swank decision. We had comments on mercury. We had comments from all over the place. And very early on in this process, I determined, hey, you know what? This is completely a useless approach because we're not going to find it. I was there the day this got turned on. I was in the old executive office building. There was actually a big red button, and the director pushed the big red button, and it went live. The director was from the EPA. EPA is the managing partner of it still is the managing partner of this group that puts Regulations.gov together, which is the portal for reviewing regulations and for submitting comments. And actually, he pledged money to our research group. He said, he wrote a letter that said, if the NSF funds, we'll throw in extra money because we like what these guys are doing. That was, for us, one of the tricks to getting some of those early NSF grants is we actually had agency buy-in in support of our research. At the same time, I had another big grant from the NSF, probably one of the biggest service learning grants in the history of service, like $500,000 to do service learning around the theme of digital citizenship, which was my students working, you can see the old monitors, working with senior citizens, working with people with cerebral palsy, working with people who were quintessentially on the wrong side of the digital divide. So at the time, just to give you a flavor, things were going online. Some people could do it and some people couldn't, and we were very much interested in what it would take to have a more democratic and egalitarian system of public participation in all things democratic. As it turned out, by 2004, I had determined that the major byproduct of putting regulation making online was mass email campaigns. And actually, is this 13 years later? It's still the same thing. Mass email campaigns are still the defining feature of online rulemaking. There is no Habermasian democracy. There are groups. The groups hire services. The services perform a function, which is they email all of the members of the group. They tell them that there's something really bad, like your baby, and that it's going to be poisoned in the womb, by mercury. You have to do something. And this company, Capital Advantage, is one of the big players. This was like a ticker that was going in real time. And so in 2004, they had generated over 16 million comments to federal agencies, which back then was a massive, back then we didn't have any 22 million comment things.
Yeah, that was sort of presaged by the FCC complaint process for indecency, which went online in the 1990s. And I actually was involved a little bit with that. And I actually did the numbers. You could actually see once it went online, it went like that. And what all the conservative, the family research councils would do is they would see, someone flashed a breast on this ad, and they would send out the emails, and they would all come back with the same complaint, the same different names.
Form letter.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just interesting that, the complaint process is relatively easy to file. I mean, it's meant for the people. There's a little bit higher of a burden for filing a comment, but nonetheless, it's the same techniques working there.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I determined, what I wrote about back in 2004, it actually angered one of my collaborators because he said, "No, it's too early in the process to reach this." Like, I really did a series of focus groups in DC. We had big business, we had small business, we had agency personnel, we had advocacy people. I mean, it was a really wide array of focus groups. And we looked at all the data, wrote up a report. My conclusion was mass email campaigns do more harm than good. And my collaborator, the sociologist, who was a little more like the kind of guy who would send comments and hope that they worked. Sorry, Steve. Don't put that on the internet either. I should just not talk. Let me
We're
be
gonna have
safe.
to filter the
Yeah,
whole
we'll filter the whole thing.
Keep it.
But I said, honestly, Steve, I got to go with this because this is my conclusion. I've talked to enough agencies to know that they really don't like that the groups are making it harder for them to do their job. The comments are not substantive. That's where the whole bullshit detector thing comes from. Is like, can you build this bullshit detector and all the rest? And part of what was going on is this was 2005. Groups were at times even lying to their members. Public comments, notably, could have been anonymous during this period. And this group said, this chapter of the Sierra Club, all fields are required by the EPA. That's a lie. All right? EPA will not accept your comments, a lie, unless the information in the form is provided. Right? So for me, this was proof that this process of submitting comments to the federal agencies was about raising membership, raising the profile of the group, getting a story in the newspaper, but ultimately about, donations. At the end of this, there's always a donate now button. And so this was very much a mobilization. I was saying to somebody else, maybe Bill Smith earlier, that even within a group like the NRDC, National Resources Defense Council, you've got your lawyers and scientists who have one view of how to comment on rules, on letterhead, printed, delivered by a courier, not over the internet, not electronic, not a form letter, substantive, written by smart people, versus the grassroots people whose view was, nope, we want to touch as many people around the country, around the world as possible with this information, and we don't really care about the comments. And so there was a divide, even within the advocacy groups, about what the purpose of public comment was. But it was quite clear from the vendors, right, who were making these fancy videos and take action and saying, if you use our services, you will raise more money. You will have more members. There will be more donations. It wasn't like they were hiding the purpose of it, and I would say this was online comments version 1. In 2003, it looked like it did in 2007. In 2007, it looked like it did in 2011, and it looks the same today. It hasn't changed a lick. There might be a little slicker tech, there might be, changes around the edges, but the model is the same, which is get the membership agitated, get the membership onto a platform, and then hope that 1 out of 100 hit the donate now button. End of story. So, not exactly deliberative democracy. It was really actually the last few days of 2006 when a man named Charlie Hamilton, who lives in Anchorage, Alaska, called me and said, Fish and Wildlife had been coming to all of our workshops. And they're not hit like FCC has been lately, but they're regularly hit with campaigns. He said, hey, something's going to happen. It was, as I put that time signature on there of December 27th, 2006, because Charlie called me like on, I don't know, the 24th or the 20th or something, and by the 27th, every environmental group in the world had their polar bear sign up, because the polar bear was being listed as endangered species. Under the Endangered Species Act, if a creature is listed, the law requires that you remove the cause. The cause, of course, was global climate change. This was the first rulemaking in which citizens could comment on global climate change. He says, I think we're going to get 1 million comments. We don't know. I don't know. He said, I'm going to have to read them. Meaning I, one person, am going to have to read everything that comes. It turned out to be 660,000 comments that they got. And they did come from all over the world. And what happened was, he convinced his bosses at the Fish and Wildlife Service to put up $250,000, which was, you know, a tidy sum of change at that time, to add to one of our grants from the NSF, so we could hire a programmer to build a prototype. And we built the prototype, and this is what it looked like. It had polar bears on it. It automatically clustered things into groups of exact duplicates, and then allowed you to navigate through near duplicates and to see in granular detail where people had deleted or added text. So anything highlighted in yellow was an addition by an individual commenter to a form letter. And what we were building was a system that would make it easier for the agency to navigate through, and this was hosted at Carnegie Mellon University, which I was my collaborator at the time, navigate through and only read the unique additions to form letters. Yeah.
How different, it's funny because, you know, tracing this in relationship to the development of electronic discovery and litigation.
Yep.
You know, I mean, the technologies are almost identical, it seems to me. I mean, how are they different? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of overlap. In fact, I was a member of the American Bar Association. I would go to e-discovery workshops, and some of the stuff I was just teaching on machine learning borrows on things that I learned at e-discovery workshops. So there is a significant amount of overlap. Duplicates and near duplicates are really important in e-discovery and email threads.
Right, exactly. That's all, you know, you can get certificates in
Yes.
writing emails and
Yes.
things like that.
Yeah, or you could just use this, which is essentially plagiarism detection software
Right.
as well. If you guys have Turnitin or something, the big one, they use the exact same mathematics that we use to do the form letters and to do tweets as well. This turns out to work really well on Twitter. And as I said in the last group, I couldn't imagine doing Twitter research without these tools. Then I started noticing some interesting things in the metadata. In particular, that there were people sending more than one comment. And in fact, in the case of Mercury, there were 87,000 people who sent 2, there were 20,000 people who sent 3, there were 5,000 people who sent 4, and you see the pattern, and this pattern reproduced itself across basically every data set we got, which was there were people who were interpreting, there was actually one person way down the list who sent 314 emails on polar bear. And Charlie, the guy I mentioned, the marine mammal biologist, who ended up sending me homemade jam, because he was so grateful for the technology, said he was so curious about the 314, he just had to know. So he tried to contact the person to say, like, why did you submit 314? And it turned out that the contact information led to the parents of a developmentally disabled young person who submitted 314 comments to save the polar bear, which I thought was just interesting. But this idea that the public comment is a plebiscite, the Kleber effect, was something that was coming up from time and time again, and it drove the agencies crazy because it's not a vote, and yet the groups were sort of going out to the members and asking them to think of it as if it was a vote. It's not a vote. It is, under the Administrative Procedures Act, you probably know, the agencies are required to respond to every substantive comment and address it. And when someone says the same thing for the 10th or the 100th or the 1000th or the millionth time, they have not introduced new information, and by definition their comment is non-substantive. So that was interesting. At the same time, 2009, I went back way back machine just yesterday before this was the first screen capture of my company's website, which launched in 2009 and literally looked like that. It was, you know, some links and some text and some designations, and we were in business. And that was the year I went up for tenure. And as I said to Bill earlier, I really don't recommend starting a company the year you go up for tenure in a Marxist department. It's not a good idea. I was also reading these really great books. So I borrowed James Gleick's subtitle for this talk because, for me, this is my favorite book of all time. I have the audiobook. I've heard it maybe 8 or 9 times, start to finish. I've read the paperback several times. He has a new book called Time Travel, which is amazing, and I also love it, maybe more than the information. But also the Jarvis books were a big impact on me. Like, what would Google do? Google would build a platform and let other people build value on top of the platform. They build the map platform, everybody sticks the map platform into a million different things. And that was a genius idea, and it was Jeff Jarvis helped me understand that. And David Weinberger, who is also brilliant, his books are really wonderful. And he's a great speaker too, I saw him give a talk, I loved it. Everything is miscellaneous, and what that means essentially is, in the old days, we tried to organize everything. Used the example of the Dewey Decimal System in the library is, every book has a place. If you go to that part of the library, you can sort of browse around and see other things based on how they've been categorized by somebody's idea of where that book belonged. But it could only go in one place in the library. And what Weinberger argues is that you can label the same data for different reasons at different times, and it's all good. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. It's folksonomic, or it's a popular taxonomy. It's with the power of filtering, which is the thing that the big impression made on me is like, and also the Gleick book. If you get 3/4 of the way into the Gleick book, and you've gone through like the early pioneers of computing, all the way to the profound explosion of data, his basic message is that the solution is filters, and that's Weinberger's as well. Is the only way humans can deal with this data, and rule makers can deal with public comments, is if they have the right filters. Not necessarily a bullshit filter, but and so duplicate detection is for us a kind of filter. Right? When we look at a corpus of 100,000 tweets and we say, well, these 50,000 are exactly the same, that's just a filter. Look at one, mark 50,000 as red. So I strongly recommend anything by these authors. Also at this point, 2011, we had been labeling using software for 10 years. So there were bells starting to go off in my head. We used other people's software up until 2007. I had often communicated to software companies, hey, could you put this feature in or that feature in, because it would really make our work a lot better if instead of holding a mouse all day long, I could just sort of click on the keypad and record my observations that way, because I was getting literally a pain in my elbow from clicking and dragging and releasing in Nudist and Vivo and MaxQDA and all these software packages that we had used. So we started building software in 2007. We built a free open source software for labeling, and that became our commercial software. But when we built it, we had no intention of building software. In fact, the idea that I would have a company, it was so far-fetched through most of this, right up until 2009, that you never would have convinced me. And if you had, it wouldn't have been that we would take our free open source software and make it. But there was a day, at some point I was like, I wonder if the agencies could use this as their coding software. And so that's when Coding Analysis Toolkit became PCAT. So CAT became PCAT, Public Comment Analysis Toolkit. And then a year later, PCAT became Discover Text, when somebody who actually knew how to label things said, hey, PCAT's a stupid name.
I teach electronic discovery. You think it's like eBay fix. It's not, but it just one of the things I often try to get my students to do is to sort of hack their own discovery program, because with
Build it from scratch.
No, but free downloads and things like that. I'm just wondering, do you think PCAT or whatever it's named right now, CAT could work to do
discovery?
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about because the problem that we face is not the big firms, who of course have, but you have a 15-person firm in Cadillac, Michigan, and they have a discovery suite of 5,000 documents. Okay, could they use it to create some sort of sort of do-it-yourself sort of thing? Nothing for huge, but for 5,000 documents could satisfy their needs.
They can use CAT. It's cat.techsifter.com.
Right. You
can find it through Coding Analysis Toolkit. They can download the code. If they can work with .NET framework code, they can augment it, change it, run it. People download it every day. I don't know what they do with it. We run it as a service for free on the web. It's more widely used than our commercial software, which a lot of people pay for. But it is the 25,000 lines of code that became the 700,000 lines that are our proprietary software. Should they use it? No, they should use Discover Text. Discover Text is a ripping good tool. We just got listed as one of the top 10 players in text mining for the next 5 years, alongside IBM SAS and Crimson Hexagon and these others. We're two guys. working out of a garage, you know, and they're 400,000 people at IBM, and you know, we're the future of text. So I would say CAD is good if you want free and open source, but if you know somebody who wants to do a small, quick project, they should be doing that in Discover Text. That's that is a powerful tool that is not going anywhere, and which enables, well, as does CAT, a method of working on documents that's more distributed, that's synchronous or asynchronous, and has embodied one of the greatest talks I've ever seen. Is Von Hippel came to our Politics of Open Source conference at UMass Amherst back when I was the editor of the Journal of Information Technology and Politics. We had the Politics of YouTube, which was actually cited as one of the reasons to stop giving USF grants to social sciences by that crazy senator. It wasn't Proxmire, it was, what was his name? The guy who was just gung-ho to...
The physician from the Midwest.
Yeah, that guy.
That's right.
Yeah. Like, why would anybody need to study YouTube? YouTube has no effect on democracy. Really? I guess we won't study bots or Russian hacking either, but... so Von Hippel, we did Politics of Open Source, and Computational Social Science and Politics. Those are our 3 NSF funded. We also did we had 4 NSF funded workshops that were great instigators for, and I strongly recommend if you're looking to build a research community around something. We floated one just recently. I'm not an academic, so I can't propose it, but on bots, because you know, what else could be more important right now than figuring out the problem of how to do bots and fake news. Anyway, so this is the sort of stuff that's in the ether, and we're building tools for crowdsourcing. So where does that leave everything? I made this slide back, I don't know, 2012, after 2012 election. People were starting to talk about the effect of Twitter on elections, and social media, and Facebook, and all the rest. And it was, you know, it was pre-Trump and the Russians and everything that just happened with Michigan and Wisconsin and Facebook and all the rest. But we were starting to try and figure out how social media fit into this broader ecosystem of the production of public awareness and the agitation for the submission of large-scale numbers of comments. So in fact, people will tweet about all sorts of things, including something that might show up in a rulemaking, like the DOI's rulemaking on the future of Hawaii, which came up recently. People were tweeting about it, but it actually turned out to be a case where we were helping. I'll say a little bit more about that. And what I've always told people is, you know, someone asked me at the end of the last session, are machines going to take over? No, they're not going to take over for humans. There's always going to be a role for humans. What I caution people on is just trying to turn too much over to the machines too fast. There's always a role for humans in the loop, whether it's an analytic role or a validation role or making a key decision role. What I can't stand is when people take a million anythings and shove them into a tool and expect some pretty picture to come out and have that picture be a valid inference based on data. It's not. It's usually completely flawed. The data's flawed. It needs to be clean, etc., etc. But so here's what we do for rule writers now. Here's where the state of the art. We built a system of filters. They work as well for Twitter and surveys as they do for public comments in rulemakings, or even things like we just had with national monuments, which was not a rulemaking, but was, I don't even know what category of decision it was, where you take away national monument status from millions of acres of protected land. But it wasn't under the EPA.
It's a presidential order. He has the right to do it whenever he wants.
Yeah. They just basically wanted to say that they took public input before they did it.
Right.
And then they got 3 million. They got 3 million comments, and they're all in our system.
Right, but they weren't required to do so.
They weren't required. They kept saying that, and yet they were. It was a very interesting. So you might want to filter by date. You might want to filter by, was this a staffer? People will say what organization you're with. If you say with the U.S. Senate, that tends to get a lot more attention than if you say you're with, something else. If you're with a local or regional or state agency, you're going to get more attention. So there's all sorts of ways you can filter on the structured metadata, and that's part of what we do. A big part of what we do is the automated groupings into duplicate groups. So this was actually a fairly small set of comments. I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 comments, but as the president would say, believe me, When there's a lot more comments, these groups get a lot bigger. So in the case of monuments, there were big clusters of exact duplicates that were 100,000 or more that were all about bear's ears or some other monument. And what our system does is allows first of all, the review of sort of the size and scope of the groups, but then also the ability to sample out of the groups. So you take one item from every group. And this is the thing that becomes incredibly valuable for Twitter data as well, because Twitter has all these groups in it as well. They have the retweets. So when you see this display on Twitter, it's the biggest, most viral groups, and sampling out of those can be useful as well. Another thing we do is very important is the near duplicates. So every form letter that allows, when it's one of those ones where the group sends you to a website and the website has the form letter pre-populated, but the user can edit, those were the ones that the agencies were most worried about. Back in 2003, the EPA described them as ticking time bombs in terms of if somebody actually starts on a form letter but puts a substantive comment in, and we don't see it because it was in a form letter, and then they litigate, they could throw out 2 or 3 years worth of rulemaking. This is what they told us, if we don't find every single substantive comment and respond to it. So what the near duplicates do is kind of nifty. This is a form letter, right? This is a modified form letter. So what the algorithm is doing is, like plagiarism detection, it's identifying the parts in blue that are additions, that are unique. It's highlighting in yellow the parts that were edits from the original form letter. And when these number in the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, it means that they can provide a report that shows literally that they've reviewed one of every duplicate, and that they've looked at every single near duplicate, even though 99.9% of the near duplicates are non-substantive, but they've at least been looked at, and also we can highlight the things that are unique, right? So here's another thing that happens a lot in these, where you see the remnant of the form letter in the letter itself. Pink is deletions, and other examples of duplicates. These show up as duplicates when there's see attached. We have ways for filtering on attachments, attachment types. But this, I've got many examples of the trivial ways in which citizens edit form letters. Typically, the groups don't believe that citizens are capable of writing a good comment. They may pay lip service to their citizen knowledge, to citizen democracy, to citizen participation. But if you talk to the group leaders about what they really think about the citizens, they think that they're uninformed, that they're not capable of writing substantive comments, that we can only feed them these form letters and let them make emotional. Now, there are exceptions. A group like the scientist group,
Scientists.
yeah. They believe that their members are smart, of course they're scientists, that they can write good comments, that they can instruct them on what a good comment is. It's not a form letter, it's not an emotional appeal. It provides data, it provides new information. I mean, I've trained a lot of agency officials how to use the software to review comments, and the most common triage code scheme is new information, no new information. Where the first round of review is all no, 1 in 100.
Well, it's because they could get reversed, and that's the whole point. If you can show that you did not consider this
Right.
idea or
Exactly.
concept, they could get reversed
Exactly.
if they care about that.
Yeah. So, and then these we can put together a group of comments that are all the ones that don't belong to any group. And hey, look, they may not be substantive, but they're not form letters, right? And if they may have fragments of form letters in them, but there's enough of a difference between what the individual has written that it can't be algorithmically put into a group. So often we're creating multiple filter types. So the file type, has it been coded or not, is it a single or not? You can stack these filters up, and for agencies and for analysts of Twitter, like the ones that are here for the workshop, it's the stacking up of different filter types that allows them to break things into piles. Sometimes they'll break things using search terms or Boolean search, combination search terms, saying, okay, all this stuff is going to the legal team, all this stuff is gonna go to the people with biology background, all this stuff is gonna go to the habitat people, and et cetera, et cetera. So a big part of what we do is just make it easier to, well, navigate the documents. If you've ever been to Regulations.gov and tried to look through a docket, it's pretty brutal, right? They get $50 million every 5 years. It's Booz Allen or Lockheed Martin. And it is one of the worst, like many federal government websites. There's a list of documents. You click on one, you wait, it loads, you review it. Is there a button to get to the next one? No. How do you get to
Not
the
visible, right?
not visible. There's no button. You go back to the list. When you go back to the list, does it show you where you are in the list? No. You're kind of on your own to figure that out. And then you got to click to load the next one. There's 10 or 20 per page. If you've got 1 million comments in there, the idea that you're going to review them through the system is impossible. So part of what we did was just make it easier for them to take the bulk extract from the federal document management system and to load it into our system, and then to break the comments into these piles, specialized piles, duplicates, non-duplicates, singles, files with attachments, files without attachments, et cetera, et cetera. Then what do? They search. So one of the ways we break things into piles is with search, right? Search, we take search results, we put them into buckets, send that bucket to Team A, they're gonna work on that bucket. Keyword frequencies are useful. A lot of people treat word clouds like they are some kind of result of research. They're not. They are. It's just a method of dropping out stop words which have no meaning and showing a visualization. Then with ours, like if I'm interested in Kanaka, I would click on it and that would bring a search result of all the documents with Kanaka. It's a pass-through to get to a point. It's not a real, I can't say people treat these things like they're results.
They're pretty.
They're pretty and they're easy. We allow people to build little dictionaries of keywords. So, I've got, from when I was trying to do some political work on the last campaign, I had a keyword dictionary of all Bernie Sanders rivals. I was training a machine classifier to know when the word Sanders is in a tweet, is it Bernie or not? Turns out there's famous athletes and celebrities and others who have the name Sanders. A lot of Sanders tweets were not about Bernie. And one way you can fix this is by building a dictionary where if Sanders appeared in Clinton or Sanders and who are those other losers? I don't know, but you get the idea. Dictionaries are very useful. So sometimes we'll stack define search, file type, coding status all together and stack those filters up and get subsets of documents. We have a style of coding which is where you build the labels as you're going. And this is used for a wide variety of reasons. When you don't know what the labeling scheme is that you want to use, your classification scheme, you take a random sample. These are like 300 seeds of clusters or exact duplicate groups or singles, and the agency personnel were going through it as they were looking at items. They could use existing codes or type up new codes, call those like candidate codes, and then maybe they would, out of this, a few trials, develop the final code list and use a final code list to go through the big pile. Let them see their attachments. You get all sorts of, probably weird things being attached. In the case of the monuments, it was lots of people sending pictures of them on a mountain bike or a fishing trip or other things. But like in the case of the wetlands, if you can show nesting ducks in a place where some guy's trying to tell you it's not a wetlands half the year, but you go there the time of year that it is a wetlands, you take a picture of ducks and you can geolocate that picture and put that into a comment, that's a substantive comment to the EPA on wetlands. Now, are the NRDC going to teach their members how to go out and take pictures of ducks? They should. It would work. Actually, that wetlands one was one of the most interesting rulemakings we worked on. We referred to it was around 2003 or 4. One of the first ones we had data on is the SWANK. SWANK was a Supreme Court decision. I don't know what it stands for. But essentially it was a Supreme Court decision about what are navigable waters of the U.S., which is tied to the Clean Water Act, and how a wetland gets defined is protected or not. And in that case, it looked real bad. It was George W. Bush was president. it looked real likely they were going to loosen the rules to allow development to go on in wetlands all over the country. It was going to be a big disaster. Until a meeting at the 11th hour where a bunch of citizens got to talk to the president. But those citizens were all from the Hook and Bullet gang. So they were all hunters and fishermen from the big hunting and fishing groups. And they got to sit down with the president, and the next day they pulled the rule. It's like, damn. And so things happen along the way. But a big part of what we're doing is allowing the sorting of comments, the creation of categories, that iterative experimentation with the data, looking at it, browsing it, searching it, filtering it, coding some of it, and then ultimately allowing reporting to go on about what was in the data. This is probably the most common rulemaking code scheme. Actually, it's usually simpler than this, but for, against, both. Surprising number of comments are difficult to place on for, against, or unsure. Right, so we document metadata from the FDMS. This is a typical comment through FDMS or through a form letter campaign. And what the analyst would do, alone or in a group, is the comment loads to the screen, they hit the keystroke, it's coded, the next one loads. This was the workflow that we thought made more sense than go to the list, pull the document off the list, wait for the document to load, review the document. I don't know, there's nothing in the federal document management system or Regulations.gov for coding. So you'd have to make some sort of notation on a pad or on a spreadsheet, go back to the list, get the next document. In our system, for, against, the next item loads. You know, you don't even have to hit the next button. You code it, the next one loads, you code it, the next one loads. It's just faster. Managing the coding, this is sort of so from the owner of the data set, which is my management, allows me to assign what we call peers. So the system was built around the time Facebook was becoming important. And everybody was like looking at Facebook and going, oh, holy moly, wow, social network, cool. And I invite you to be my friend on Facebook, you say yes, we're connected. Right, on Discover Text, I invite you to be my peer, you say yes, we're connected. I can share data with you, you can code my data, I can code your data. So we sort of have the architecture of the Facebook connectivity built into our software, which ended up being really important, not just for agencies getting through comments, but also for some of the key discoveries we made that led to the patent we got last year for ranking human annotators the same way that Google ranks web pages. It's called CodaRank, and it's probably the most important idea I've ever had in my whole life. But it's not on this topic, so I won't tell you more. It's big.
We'll get you back.
It's big, yeah, it's big. Someday you're going to hear about CodaRank. But the main idea here is we would tell people Facebook's a social network, Discover Text is an analytic network, and you connect with people on Discover Text not because you like them, but because you think they can add value to your project. We created an annotation system, so when you see a comment that is substantive, and that's really the needle in the haystack in public comment, you found something you need to respond to. If you highlight that comment on the screen as you see it, and then hit the annotation button, the highlighted text goes into this box called trigger text automatically. You can code the trigger text, and then you can write an annotation about it. So ultimately what agencies are doing is starting with a mass of comments, deduplicating them, right? Pulling out samples, developing code schemes, and then say, okay, we're going to code everything now. One of all the duplicate groups, all the near duplicates, and all the singles. And when we find something that's important, we're going to annotate it. And at the end, we're going to export all of our annotations. So we'll have all the triggers, all the coding of the triggers, and all the annotations about the triggers in a single spreadsheet or a Word document. And that's what they write their response with, right? Is the exported results of the annotations of the actually substantive documents. We keep track. If a comment is seen on the screen, it's marked as seen. If it's coded, it's marked as red. If it's seen, if it's coded in the system, it's marked as coded. In the case of the monuments, this was really important. But most rulemakings, maybe they come in over 90 days, and you start the process, 30 days, 10 days in, 30 days in. You need to be able to filter at any point in the process for items that have been coded and items that have not been coded. It says on the homepage of our software that items not coded is my favorite filter. It's a stupid thing to put on a website, but it's true. I actually do love this incredibly valuable filter because in iterative projects, you never want to go back and code the same thing more than once. You want to always be working with fresh data, and that's what this functionality allows. And then ultimately, people need to be able to report out, how many we coded, how many we read, how many we annotated, how many were duplicates, what were the biggest groups, and things like that. And exports are important too, for a variety of reasons. We don't force people to lock their data in our system forever. You can bring data into our system, whether it's public comments, or tweets, or anything else, and then you can bring the data back out, the metadata back out, as well as any of the coding you do, any of the machine classification, any of the annotations, and get them into a format that's interoperable with any decent software system in the world. We're looking for over time at, speaking of time, I better check. Oop, gotta wrap up. I think we're at the end. We provide services to government agencies, so in some cases, they don't want to learn the software or read the comments. So we've worked on rulemakings where my students do all the coding, and or all the triage, at least. Maybe not, we won't do the review of the long substantive letterhead comments. We'll leave that, it's basically all the agencies want to read anyway. We'll do the triage on all the duplicates and near duplicates and singles and try and flag anything that meets the criteria that they've established for what's substantive. And agencies are surprisingly willing to use students to do this work because compared to some of the firms like ICF International, big consulting firms that sell these services, the cost per comment to farm out comment review can be $2 to $3 per comment, even when 500,000 of the comments are duplicates. They'll get a price, they'll say, well, here's the price for 250,000 comments, here's the price for 500,000 comments, and it comes down at like somewhere between $1.50 and $3 a comment for review, even though many of them are just duplicates. So using our software and our students, they can do it for a fraction of the cost of working with a firm like ICF International. And just in the time of Nick, I am done.
Those are the longest trains I have ever And excellent. This is, I mean, that is incredible. So people will use your software to bid against other people for analytics.
Well, we bid against other people.
Yeah.
We bid against, I can remember the first time that Fish and Wildlife showed me some of the estimates that they got. They didn't send the actual, they send it, these are the ballpark, and those numbers are pretty consistent over time that firms are billing $2 a comment for review. Now, some of the comments take a lot longer than a split second to look at it and go non-substantive, but it's in my opinion, it's a beltway price, to say the least.
Yeah, relativity, I think. The prices in discovery are going way, way down. It's being commodified, and I'm surprised that. I guess the governments are just so out of it they don't realize.
Automated.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think in part the typical way agencies have dealt with the massive numbers of comments is to farm them out to third parties,
Right.
and not to wait in. When we went to the EPA in 2004 and got the Mercury comments, which was a huge breakthrough for us, they spent 3 days running a special script to get the 500,000 emails out of their email server and into a format they could give them to us, which I think was a CD, maybe back then, I can't remember. But that was a huge lift for them to get us those comments. But my computer science buddies were like, you got 500,000 emails? Are you kidding me? In 2004? Those weren't just floating around back then. The Enron emails, I don't think, were out yet in 2004, I'm not sure. And there were the NIST data sets that were Wall Street Journal articles, and there were these standard corporate, but the the reason most of the accidents that made me a software guy and not a historian happened was because I asked agencies for data and they gave it to me, and computer scientists went like, what? Oh, we would love to look at 500,000 emails. That would be fantastic. And then, further from that was, when I started to better understand, when they saw us doing social science coding, which was using Atlas or Nudist or Vivo or something to label things one at a time, they said, well, can we put some codes in there too? And then you give us the results and we'll see if we, and then we realized, well, computer scientists need thousands and thousands of training items. This is not the way to do it. And that's when I started asking the companies, could you build software with keystroke coding? And most of the software companies were like, no, because none of our people would ever want to do that, right? Because with keystroke coding, you have to have a predefined span of text. And in all the qualitative software, you have to go click, drag, release to highlight the span of text. And so what we were asking for was a fundamentally different way for documents to flow through the system. And I had seen a few people, like computer scientists, would build these one-off tools for labeling, and they were their own private labeling tools. And what we built was a public open source labeling tool, CAT, that had keystroke coding as its core and measurement of inter-rater reliability and adjudication of differences as its measurement backbone. And that's what ultimately led to some of the most important things we did was we had data and we had demand for annotations. And back then, it was much more common for computer scientists to use the existing annotated sets that were available, and less common, because it was so cumbersome, to create manual annotation sets. And what we did is we flipped that on the head and said, no, you should be able to create an annotation set for any data, and actually it'll work better if you train on the data you want to use your machine learning on than if you use data that's trained on hotels to do restaurants or something like that, Newspaper